Dr. Tiffany Brown is our board member, and many of you know her as the Deputy Superintendent of Long Beach Unified. Tiffany is an incredible board member, an amazing friend, and someone who is incredibly authentic in this work of equity and justice. The other person that I'm honored to introduce today is Dr. Anthony Ocampo, who is new to our CCEJ family, but now that he's here, he's stuck. And we're excited to have you here with us, Anthony. Anthony is a professor of sociology at Cal Poly Pomona. He has written several books. The one I'll mention today is Brown and Gay in LA. You will find Anthony to be a wealth of knowledge, but overall just a warm and really insightful person who is helping us move this work forward in really amazing ways. So without further ado, I introduce you to Anthony and Tiffany, who will be in conversation today. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Such a pleasure to be with you on a really important day of engagement together. And I'm just very honored to be sitting next to you, Dr. Ocampo.
As am I. Oh, this works. This mic works.
We're working, and we're doing the thing that's really hard to do, which is talking to a room full of people who are eating. So keep eating, and we're going to have a really nice conversation. Rena shared some things about you in opening. I just wanted to add a few details to that. So this is this really uncomfortable moment where I talk about you in front of your back, right? Because what you've done and the amazing work you've put into the world deserves to be highlighted a bit more. So Dr. Ocampo comes to us as an author of multiple pieces of incredible work, one of which I just finished this morning while running on the treadmill. I was listening and finished up Brown and Gay in LA. In addition, he leads a podcast that's called Professoring, which is incredible. He's been a part of a Netflix documentary called White Hot, The Rise and Fall of Abercrombie and Fitch, which is incredible. He was raised in Northeast LA, and he's been to a couple of universities you might have heard of, Stanford University as well as UCLA. So he is the whole package on paper, and now we have the opportunity to learn some things about him in person. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And just, I want to say a big thank you to everyone here, because as evidenced by the last 10 minutes, there's a lot of conversations that people are having and are excited to have. And I feel like we're living in a moment, or we've lived in a moment where people are afraid to start talking because they think they're going to make a mistake or say the wrong thing. As the king of having made mistakes and saying the wrong thing, I just want to give everyone permission to lean into that, because that's where the biggest growth happens. And we're doing it here with in a group that has grace and empathy and knows that we're all here for the same reason. So I'll start with that. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful. So let's jump right in the spirit of the day, Roots of Justice, which Roots of Justice is a powerful title, because what it means is that we are growing something new, right? It's not branches of justice, it's not leaves of justice, it's roots of justice. And so when you think about that, what do you take inspiration from? Where do your roots of justice come from?
So I think this is the hardest question, so if you'll excuse me, I wrote down the answer and I took a picture of it. So I don't, as RuPaul might say, I don't F it up. So Roots of Justice, I wanted to make sure I had a thoughtful answer, because as you know, the term justice is thrown around a lot. A lot of times terms are thrown around a lot, and we don't always sort of stop and think and ask ourselves, what do we mean by these terms that we're mentioning? So not just justice, but other terms like, for example, intersectionality, which was mentioned earlier. So it's going to be really important for us to think about the definition of these words. So for me, this is what I wrote down. So justice, it's again a term we throw out a lot. It means a lot of things. I think most people, you ask the average person, they're going to say justice is everyone is treated fairly under the law. right? We have shows like Law and Order or all these other true crime shows that talk about justice all the time. But I just want to offer a different definition of justice that I feel like I've developed after reading a lot of work by activists and abolitionists like Miriam Kaba. And for me, justice is this idea that everyone is a person of value. Everyone is a person of value. And it seems so simple, but we live in a society, we live in a world where we have to be vigilant about this idea of justice because there are groups of people who are systematically devalued in all sorts of ways. Women, people of color, trans folks, non-binary folks, queer folks, undocumented people, people who are disabled. The list goes on. And so it's really important for us to think about how in the spaces we're in, are these people being devalued? Are they not getting opportunities to be centered? And for you, that might be in a different arena. It might be in the schools, it might be in your business, it might be in your neighborhood and community, your organization, your church, for example. It took me a long time to realize that for me, where I found my contribution to justice was in storytelling. I found a lot of places in life where I felt like I didn't belong, where I felt like my opinion and history, my family didn't matter. And as cliche as it sounds, storytelling was my way to get free. And storytelling helped me understand in times when I was most alone that there was I was part of something much larger than myself. I was part of a history much larger than myself. And I think stories is, again, it sounds cliche, but we're living in a time where parts of the world are trying to systematically erase stories about racism, stories about slavery, stories about Black and brown communities, stories written by queer and trans people. And stories are being written about these populations that are just plain wrong. And we see that all the time anytime people talk about folks who just they happen to be born in a different country, and they happen to get here in a particular way, be systematically dehumanized by using words that start with I. I think you all know what I mean. And then one thing I wanted to say, I learned this from a group in Pomona, a youth organization, Gente Organizada. They do this thing where when they ask a question, what is roots of justice, they ask, what is it not? And I love that. And so I just want to end by saying justice is not punishment.
Yeah, we're not ending, we're just getting warmed up. You're touching on this already. The idea of intersectionality has been super important to the work of CCEJ and many other social justice spaces. And I just want you to share a little bit more about what that idea of intersectionality means to you and how it really influences your perspective.
Yeah, let's just do a quick survey. How many of you have heard this term before in some context? For whom is intersectionality a relatively new term? Raise your hand. Okay, great. I think that's totally okay. When I first heard this term intersectionality as an undergrad in college in the 90s, I never thought it would be front page news because it was like an obscure academic theory. But I think I'll start with that technique of saying what intersectionality is not. A lot of people think intersectionality like an intersection, and they think, oh, that's two identities, right? It's this identity plus this identity. And that's a small part of it, but I want folks to think of intersectionality a little bit differently in the way that Black women like Kimberly Crenshaw, Patricia Hill Collins, Audre Lorde, whose ideas, they're the giants whose shoulders who buttress everything I've ever done. Intersectionality is this idea of living at the intersection of different systems of oppression and different systems of power. So as Professor Crenshaw, Audre Lorde, as they noted, the experience of Black women is not the same as the experience of Black men or the experience of white women. It's its unique thing because they live at the intersection of different systems of oppression. And so when we say intersectionality, in the case of the book that I wrote, it's folks that were children of immigrants, Latinx, Filipino American, who are also queer, and for them they're living at the intersection of racism, xenophobia, and queerphobia. And that's where I try to make sure whenever this term gets thrown out, we try to have that precise definition of it. Because I've seen sometimes people think, oh, I'm a white woman, that's two identities, so that's intersectionality. And I'm like, I love your engagement with these ideas, but let's take a beat and pause and try to make sure that we get it right, because as we know, even ideas of justice can be reappropriated for in not so great ways, which we've seen with the language of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. We've seen this discourse deployed in really confusing ways that are not for the sake of racial equality.
Love it. Your explanation's amazing, and it just added some things to what I've already thought about and where I hope to grow. I'm sure some of you had the same experience as you were speaking of intersectionality. Continuing on the theme of justice, I want to shift us towards the idea of gender justice, which has really been a core piece of work that CCEJ has been touching on, and also want to draw your attention to just some of the resources that are on your table, because you have some things that really offer definition of words like sexism, heterosexism, cisgenderism, all of which we hear mixed into different parts of rhetoric of right now. I want to bring you to the idea of gender justice. What does gender justice look like to you? And how do you see the work that you're doing contributing to gender justice?
Yeah, thank you. Gender justice is a huge topic. And I think, in similar ways to racism, sometimes people simplify gender justice as like, oh, I'm just making a joke about women, or I'm just saying these like pejorative, like locker room talk. That's one tiny part of gender justice, but we got to think about the structures that we exist in. So when I think about gender justice, I'm thinking about women's bodies and the ability for women to have autonomy over their bodies, which I thought was an assumption. But we're seeing that in many places it's not. There are states where, as we know, reproductive justice has been on the chopping block, and that reverberates in all sorts of ways, particularly to the most vulnerable communities. Obviously, with respect to reproductive issues, but I'm thinking about my own students, women of color, who are applying to grad school, who tell their advisors, I'm not applying to grad school in Texas because it's dangerous for me to go to school there. And so that's a way in which, we're thinking about an issue of reproductive justice, but now it's affecting education. And that's just one example of how these things are interrelated. Of course, I think about workplace discrimination. I think about the way that trans women are still, people assume that the LGBTQ community, everything's hunky-dory. I don't know where I got that term, hunky-dory. Because of same-sex marriage. But the reality is, we got to think about, again, who's missing from that social movement? Who's missing from this conversation? And the easy answer is that if you look at the experience of trans women of color who have the inability to find work, who are targeted in their communities, who experience violence at way higher rates than many other segments of the population. For me, gender justice is about centering the folks who are most vulnerable. And again, I just want to give a shout out to Black feminist thought, because it's from that school of thought where I learned this really important question, which is really simple, which is who's missing? Who's missing from the conversation? And I think it's been my rule of thumb in all arenas to just ask that question, who's missing in the stories we tell, in the books we write, in the classes we teach, and who gets airtime in a meeting, right? Who's talking the most in a meeting? I see some, thank you, I see this now. But it's all about thinking about who's missing from the conversation, not just the voice, but whose rights are missing from a policy, things like that.
I saw you getting some snaps out there.
I did.
That's good. So given all the learning, the unlearning, what you've done in your life around gender justice, what would you tell your younger self?
Whew. Okay. What would I tell?
Let's personalize a little.
Yeah. I knew this question was going to be asked, and I think it's one of the most nervous ones. Because I do think there was, and I do this a lot with my friends, close friends, my therapist, my mentors. There's a lot of unlearning that I had to do with the way I think about myself. So you mentioned that reading the bio is like the most embarrassing thing because I'm hearing these nice things about me. But the reality is I'm a Filipino-American kid, child of immigrants, who is also queer. And so let's just say that I lived in a world that told me that who I was didn't matter. And I'm in my 40s now. And to be honest, I think that I've accumulated the accomplishments, I've done good things in the world, I've written a few books. Part of me thought, oh, if I just do these things, then maybe I can be valued in the way that I thought I should have been as a kid. And I realized that that's a dangerous game to play because my acceptance of myself and our acceptance of other people shouldn't be predicated on productivity and this idea of like you work therefore you count. At the root of it, again, speaking of the definition of justice I tried to offer is every person is a person of value. And so I think what I tell myself, younger self, is that despite everything that you see in the world telling you that you are less than, whatever you do, whether it's a mistake, whether it's a triumph, whether it's a tragedy, whether you're being a hot mess, there's been a lot of those moments, you are a person of value. And I think that I underestimated how vigilant I had to be to tell myself that message, even as an adult with college degrees and a job and relationships. At the root of it, I'm still that kid that didn't really believe that I mattered.
Thank you. So deeply appreciate your vulnerability with us and also the way that you carry the stories of other people. In enjoying your book, I was just so touched by the way that you lift the stories of others as a way of making connections. And we had opportunity to meet. We go way back 1 week now. We had opportunity to meet last week. And in our conversation, you shared some things about young people that you've met. And there was a specific story that you shared that really stayed with me. And so I just wanted to give you opportunity to lift the voices of young people into the room in any way that you feel fits right now.
So I want to, if it's okay, I can share 2 stories that are going to be related.
The mic is yours, so.
So for the book that was shared, shameless plug, Brown and Gay in LA, I asked you this morning, and asked other folks, where's the office of CCEJ? And you said Bixby Knowles. And it made me think, the youngest person I interviewed for this book was from Bixby Knowles. And so I want to tell you a story. There are no coincidences, as you said. I want to tell you his story. And he has a lot of similarities to me. He was a son of Filipino immigrants, grew up in Bixby Knowles, went to school not too far from here. In the book, his name is Manny. I changed it for confidentiality reasons. But, Manny was someone that embodied this idea of like, if I just work hard enough, maybe people will accept me, including my family. He, as a high school student, he had this lovely phrase when we met. He said, "Gay people love leadership opportunities." I was like, oh shoot, that's right. So Manny was straight A student. He was class president for all 4 years of high school. Basically, he was, as he put it, I can't be the football son my dad always wanted, so I can at least be the smart son. And at one point, Manny, because of social media and I'm thinking about next Benedict, someone who was bullied by classmates. A similar thing happened with Manny where students found out about Manny having a boyfriend because he posted a picture of him and his boyfriend holding hands, kissing on Instagram. And what should have been what was one of the happiest moments of this young man's life turned into a nightmare because his classmates circulated it, and not in a positive way. And when his teachers witnessed that, instead of intervening, they stayed silent about it. And at some point, it got to his parents. And when his parents found out, despite the fact that his parents, were immigrants, came to this country so he could have a better life, etc., when he would sit at the dinner table and he would drink from a cup, like his mom and him were sitting next to each other, and his mom had a cup, and he just happened to pick up the cup and drink from the cup that was his mom's, she immediately got up and threw it away. When he would sit on her bed, she would change the sheets. And I thought, wow, this is a story he told me after California had same-sex marriage. And so it just showed me that is just the scratching the surface in terms of LGBTQ rights. But the reason I share this is in part because I just wanted to remind folks that people are still going through stuff, even if the world seems like it's getting better in a place like California. Let's just say, drive to the Inland Empire. It's not the same story. I live there. And so I wanted to share these stories to showcase how much labor and choreography and just navigation that young queer people of color have to do to just be and survive. And sometimes when I was doing this, I thought, am I just reproducing the trauma, etc.? But recently I did a book event where it was at a Barnes & Noble's nearby, and there was a book signing. And, I wrote about these young men that were in their 20s and 30s, and I thought, okay, I can't do it all, so this is what I'm going to focus on, and other people can write about other segments of the community. But what surprised me during this book signing a few months ago was that a young black girl, she was 16, but she looked like she was 12 or 13. Tiny girl, she's about less than 5 feet tall. She comes up to my table and she whispers to me, "Thank you. I just want to say thank you." And I can't hear her, so I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you." And she says, "Thank you. I just want to say thank you. I can't talk too loud because my mom's right there and she doesn't know." And that's all she had to say. But thank you, because these stories mean so much to me, because everything happening in school right now is so hard. And I've met a lot of people during book signings and events, but when I met this young girl, I just unraveled. I just lost it. I was just a big ball of tears, because I thought, here's a young girl going to school in 2023, and how is she experiencing the same thing that I was experiencing in 1994, 1995? And it made me feel so sad. But despite the difficulty she shared, there was such a feeling of hope and she said this to me, she said in so many words, "I feel like I see you here, and it makes me feel like I have a tomorrow." And again, I just lost it. I just lost it. And again, her mom brought her there, and what was really beautiful about this is that, yes, her mom didn't know, but it was clear that her mom knew. The reason she brought her there was because she knew, even if she didn't bring it up with her daughter, she wanted her daughter to bring it up to her. And I just thought, wow, this is what storytelling can do. I wrote this book about a set of college students from a different part of the world, and here we have a high school kid who feels like this book can be a lifeline, and I thought, can I say that? Holy-ish. Wow, writing actually matters. It matters especially now.
Yeah, it matters especially now. That's super powerful. I'm going to ask another question, and as I'm asking this question, I want to tell all of you that we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A. So I understand there's some yellow sheets. Jesse's holding them up. There's some yellow sheets on the table. So just as you're listening to this next question, think about if you have a question, and we're going to have an opportunity to pull some questions from the audience. But in the spirit of what matters now and what happens next, where do you see taking your work next? What's the next space that you will be engaging in, and where might the next stories come from?
Thanks for asking this. Every question a writer gets is, what's the next book? And I'm like, this took me 10 years to write. But but I am working on a new book. I am a big believer in signs, and I do believe there are no coincidences. And when we go back a week. This is our first day meeting in person. And when we met in person, like we met an hour ago, we hugged, of course, but something caught my eye, and I was immediately, I feel like I got distracted, and I just disappeared for a moment, because in that basket that you have, there's a picture of a young man there by the name of Angelo Quinto, who is a Filipino-American military veteran who had a mental health crisis. And a few months after George Floyd was murdered by having a police officer kneel on his neck for a number of minutes, the same thing happened to Angelo Quinto after his mental health crisis in his own home in front of his mother and sister. This was in Antioch, California. In California, where we assume California is this bastion of everything's hunky-dory in California. But what was additionally painful beyond the loss of Angelo was also the aftermath of how his family was, it was covered up. What happened to him was covered up. There was efforts to gaslight his family and say it's actually his fault. There was this, pursuit to find drugs, even though there was no drugs in his system, just to spin the story. And, this was happening during a time when anti-Asian hate was public conversation, mainstream news. And I thought, this institutional violence is a form of anti-Asian hate. It's just really hard to capture it on social media. And there's another young man, a young queer kid by the name of Jackson Salas, whose story didn't make it in the same, make headlines in the same way Angelo's did, but he was a queer kid who died of a drug overdose mysteriously in the home of a wealthy white man more than twice his age. And I had the chance to see the body cam footage, the investigation, and it was really enraging to see that the version of the story that became the official story was the one this older white man gave to the police with no question about what might have actually happened. And that's a form of, that's another, again, you can't capture that on social media in the same way an attack on the street was. This was the seed, this was the root of the book that I'm working on now, which is about the experience of Asian Americans of all backgrounds, men, women, queer folks, Asian Americans, their experience and how they collide with the criminal justice system, because anti-Asian violence has been front page news, the criminal justice and racial inequality has been front page news, but when have we ever heard stories about Asian Americans and the criminal justice system be included with each other? And so that's the journey I've been on over the past 2 years. And it's a very different experience writing this book, because for this, Brown and Gay in LA, I am a queer son of immigrants. For my first book, which is about Filipinos in LA, I'm a Filipino American from LA. This has been a little bit of a push for me because I'm not someone that has experienced incarceration. I'm not someone that's in my family who's experienced incarceration. And so I had to do a lot of soul searching to ask myself, am I allowed to write about these stories? If I do write about these stories, how can I do it in a way that's not just mining people's experiences? How can I do it in a way that's reflexive and acknowledges that while I'm part of the Asian American community, I have a very different experience. And so how do I, not to, puns, how do I do justice to these stories?
No coincidence. No coincidence. When I asked you what you were doing next, I thought I was meaning this weekend. So you chose to tell us about your next book, and we all can't wait now. So it's amazing.
I think I'm gay, so I have a brunch, I'm sure.
Okay, so we're going to do, we have not as much time for audience questions as we'd like, but we've got one here that's actually a phenomenal question. What's the difference between being queer and gay?
Thank you. This is a great question. I want to make sure that folks know that these terms mean very different things. For different generations, queer was a pejorative term. It was an insult. People threw it or hurled it like an insult. And as the years go on, queer, similar to the term Chicano, was also in a similar way hurled in a different way than we know it now. Queer has become a term of empowerment that gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual people have embraced, partly as an umbrella term, but also as a verb to talk about how these categories that we are so used to, men, women, for example, it's a lot more complicated than that. We have to literally queer the boundaries of who we understand to be a woman, or who we understand to be a man, or who we understand to be, in my book, like who we understand to be a Filipino or a Latinx person or an American, for example. Queer can be used in that idea of like trying to expand our notions of who's included. But a lot of people might also use queer as maybe because of shows like Queer Eye for the straight guy, but they might use queer as like an umbrella term for LGBTQ. And some people use it that way, but a lot of people use it, like among activists and academics, use it as a way to say like, oh, I'm queering ideas, I'm queering categories, I'm again, expanding the boundaries of what's included. Gay obviously was, it's also been, when I was a kid, if someone said you're gay, that didn't necessarily mean you're gay, that meant other things. Like, you like the Clippers, you're gay. Like something like that. Like, I don't know why I don't even watch sports. I don't know why that's my example. But, it was a way to police masculinity. But of course, like language is malleable. We come up with new definitions of language all the time. And so gay also became a term of empowerment of the gay rights movement, for example. And so, the meanings of these terms are constantly evolving. So I love that we have a question on language because it just shows folks' dedication to wanting to get these terms right.
This is amazing. We have another one. I'm sorry? Okay, excellent. What's one thing an ally did for you, or your wish that an ally would have done for you that made a difference? Ooh, this is a good question. This is a good one. Do you want me to say it again, or do you have it? What's one thing an ally did for you, or that you wish an ally would have done that made a difference?
I'll take an opportunity to share an example. So we've been talking about LGBTQ issues, IA issues front and center here. And I just want to share a story of my own coming out experiences when it pertained to my friends. And it's something that I've been reflecting on recently. When I came out to my friends in college, the first thing they said was, oh, it doesn't matter, we love you, you're amazing, et cetera, et cetera. But the second thing they said is, well, at least you're not that kind of gay person. Ugh, right? And I'm like, wait, you just wait and see. But it was this idea that for any minority, there's the good gay or the good queer and the bad queer. And the bad queer, and that my friends, without even doing it intentionally, the bad queer is the one that's effeminate, the one that breaks gender boundaries, that doesn't act like a man, etc. And then I also realized that in the context of my like heterosexual friends, they would like talking about gay, like they would talk about gay things, but it was almost a spectacle, like a joke about gay sex, or like a joke that was just like sort of still othering me. And so I've been on this kick of like gay people and queer people may have like access to their families. They're invited to the weddings, they're invited to the social gatherings, but on the part of straight folks, there's no effort to learn the culture and history of queer people, which is an incredibly rich culture and history. And I'm just going to share a quick story. I don't want to say who it is in case he sees a recording of this one day, but let's just say I know someone who, you know, is totally accepted by his family. Like his family is all about their partner and has been accepting since high school. And one day they're at a birthday party for kids, and this person says, "Hey, I just want to show you this amazing drag performance that I saw. It's on YouTube." And his sister's first reaction, his sister who's accepted him, the first person he told that he was gay was, "Don't show that shit here, there are kids here." So it was this like moment where I realized, wow, like you can be accepting, tolerant of this person, but you gotta remember, this person's part of a broader community. And what if your kid is, you don't know if your kid's queer. And so I think that what I've learned is we have moments of progress, but I think people pat themselves on the back sometimes, like my friend in college, my friend's sister. And that's just the beginning. And there's a lot of work. People that have lived in the margins, and this is not my idea, it's like W.E.B. Du Bois, a black sociologist, talked about this idea of double consciousness. People that live in the margins have to learn the set of rules of the mainstream world and the set of rules of their own world. But when it's the other way around, that learning doesn't actually happen. So for me, to long story short, the allies that have been most impactful on me are the ones where they signal to me that they've done the work of learning queer history or learning, and not in a way to be performative or showy, but it's just almost like in everyday discourse and conversation, it's clear that they've done the work. So, for example, with my friends that are now having kids, they don't tolerate when someone says to their young son, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend yet?" They'll say things like, "He may not have a girlfriend. He may have a boyfriend, or he may date someone that's trans or non-binary," which is, for some reason, so unsettling to the other person. But that moment of intervention for me, and that kid tells them that this is someone that has my back for real, for real.
Yeah, language matters. I'm a queer mixed youth. What inspires you to keep going? And thank you for the person who wrote this question. I want to bring in the voice of young people. What inspires you to keep going?
That young black girl,
Yeah.
I think of her a lot. She inspires me to keep going. I think about how, this is a hard question because I think we're living in a time when we're being worn down left and right on social media, on the news, in our communities. It can feel overwhelming, and I'll be the first person to admit that I have days where I feel like I can't function, I can't get out of bed. But what keeps me going is the reality that, oftentimes when we think about justice, we're almost ignited because of some traumatic thing that happened. But what keeps me going is the joy and laughter. I think about all the laughs I never would have been able to laugh with folks in my community had we never had the chance to be ourselves. But to be honest, like, that is what keeps me going, is the ability to remember that, like, minoritized people's lives is not just trauma. Even though the publishing industry or academia or TV tries to emphasize that aspect of our lives, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of hot mess, there's a lot of shenanigans. It's in part why I kind of like reality TV, because people have they have no care in the world and act however they want. I'm like, I want some of that. And so for me, that's what keeps me going, is knowing that despite what we see on the news or reading sociology books or learn on our trainings, there's actually just a lot of mundane everyday life that happens that's just as beautiful, that we have to take inventory of. So that's what gets me out of bed. And then from there I can start moving.
One more audience question, and then we're going to do a grand finale question.
Yeah.
Okay. So having just moved to Long Beach from the IE, right?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Here we go. My children have heard more racial slurs in high school in Long Beach in 6 months than they did growing up in the IE. Ouch. How do we lift the need for this work everywhere? Deep sigh.
First of all, I'm so sorry, like, that kids are experiencing the things that I thought we were past decades ago. I think it's a good reminder for us to remember that kids are still going through it, and we have to, in the same way we got to center, like, kids are also a minoritized voice as well. We tend to marginalize their opinions and voices as well, but our these kids are a barometer for how we're doing. How's the work doing? I think in this case, you know, when stuff like this would happen when I was a kid, my dad would just be like, fight back or tell the teacher, and I'm like, that puts the onus on me, the kid. So I think for us, we got to think about who is in a position of privilege and power to actually intervene. And that's where I think teachers are so powerful. Teachers play an incredibly powerful role, because their interventions are as loud as their silence. And so my hope is that the teachers can be co-conspirators in creating a landscape where that is not behavior that's not permissible. But the other thing too is what was the antidote to these moments where my community was slandered or slurs were made. Again, this is where I credit my teachers who gave me access to stories about my community that made me see that this slur is not who I am. And I think of one of my first mentors that I had. The professor's name is Don Mabalan, Dr. Don Mabalan. He's a Filipino-American historian who unfortunately passed away in 2018. But I remember at a time when I felt like who I was as a Filipino-American didn't matter. This woman was the one who, first of all, she was someone that looked like someone from my neighborhood and family at the front of the classroom. That was amazing. But this woman pulled me aside and she would say, no. We have a rich history and a rich culture. This experience you're having is not it, but you got to put in the MF work to learn about this history and community so that you can be someone that helps counteract people that have misunderstandings of who Filipinos are, or whatever community is being referenced here.
You ready for the grand finale? It's like fireworks at the end of the fireworks show. Our vision at CCEJ is for a world where people live free of oppression and thrive. What does that world look like for you?
Thanks for this question, and if it's okay, I know I'm the speaker here, but so much of what I'm sharing is in collaboration with people that I know. So I think all of us if people were to ask us the question, do you care about women's rights? Do you care about people of color's rights? Do you care about queer and trans rights? I think we would verbally say yes, right? I think we would all agree that those things matter. How it plays out on the ground is a different story. And I want to share something that I observed from I have a friend and colleague at Cal Poly Pomona. She's a social work professor named Dr. Amanda Rodriguez Newhall. And she invited me into her social work class, and it was about justice issues. And she talked about all these ways that communities can come together to help, folks that are experiencing addictions, folks that are experiencing racism, et cetera. And during the conversation, all of our students were all about these issues. They were all identified as folks that cared about these issues. And then she did this thing in the latter half of our class where she gave her students a puzzle, like a logic game. She said, "Okay, everyone, we're gonna as a class work on this logic game. Here's the puzzle. Here's the problem. Solve it." And despite the fact that 2 seconds ago everyone cared about gender equality, racial equality, guess what happened? Who took charge? Actually, not just the white males, the Latino males also took charge. The Asian American males took charge. All males took charge. All the men just became the team leaders. They started to set the frame of discussion. They would dominate. They would interrupt, or manterrupt. And anytime one of their women colleagues would intervene, somehow or another, they'd get pushed, not literally pushed to the side, but, discouraged, or their idea would be dismissed. And sometimes it was dismissed not in a, "that's idea is stupid." It would be dismissed with the polite. Have you ever shared something and people give you polite face? Yeah, that's nice. That's just as dangerous as outright resistance to an idea. And Dr. Rodriguez Newhall gathered everyone together and was like, "Hey, everyone, didn't we all say we care about gender equality, racial equality? Why is it that, the one black woman in our class who had amazing ideas was never tapped as a resource? Why is it that all the Latina women had to form their own group in order to move forward with this project?" So I say that because it's just a clear-cut example of the things we say are one thing, but the things we do are another. And we all have a lot of moments where we have to check ourselves and ask ourselves again, and from the framework of Black feminist thought, who's missing, whose voices aren't being heard, and how can I pass the mic to make sure that these folks who have just as valuable, if not more valuable, ideas about the world, let's center their ideas and voices and see what we can come up with. And oftentimes when they do that, they get to the answer for the puzzle a lot faster than the way that they did it before.
Amazing. I'm going to end, so good. I'm going to end by reading the last line of your book, because I think it's so powerful. Don't do uncomfortable face. It's okay. Do proud face.
I like that emoji that has that.
The very thing that was once weaponized to dismiss your humanity, constrain your agency, and obstruct your opportunities can, if embraced and harnessed, become the very thing that sets you free.
Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Well, first of all, I'm like, shit, I wrote that? But I feel like I remember the moment of writing that last sentence. And yeah, I feel like it's been a long journey, and it's still a journey to remember that the thing that has been weaponized and used against me actually is the root of the justice I try to do in the world, and I hope for everyone here, you can think about those aspects of who you are that get sidelined and quieted and silenced and marginalized, and realize, hey, my gut tells me that there's something there that can be offered to the world. So let's double down and lean into that. So thank you, everyone.
I want to thank you so deeply. I want to thank you so deeply for sharing your story, for lifting the stories of others, and for planting deep roots of justice. You've really added to our conversation today, and I'm glad you're in the world, and I'm glad that we go back 1 week. Let's keep going.
Let's go back. Let's go forward lots more weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Already done, Anthony. Can we give a round of applause to Dr. Tiffany Brown and Dr. Anthony Ocampo? We're so grateful that they came to give us wisdom this morning. We have a little thank you gift from CCEJ. This is for you, the shiny one, and this is for you, the colorful one. And you are welcome to join your community. Give them another round of applause.